I'd like to start by asking you all a question. What makes a city? In some ways, I've been asking myself that same question every day for almost 3 years. It was around then that I began to feel burnt out in my environment. I was back home for about 3 years at that point, and I felt myself plateauing. Like a hermit crab, I began to feel like I had outgrown my shell, and I needed to find a newer, bigger one to grow into. So I contemplated another move, which was my usual MO after high school, and how I managed to live in 5 cities in just about 6 years. After spending enough time in this small city in the Southwest, a huge city in the Northeast seemed like the most logical choice. But after spending some time in New York to go over my options, I realized that a change in scenery wouldn't satisfy me. The truth is, I was comfortable and I wanted to stay in my hometown. But as a creative professional, I also wanted an opportunity to make a living doing what I loved. That's what led me down a rabbit hole, asking myself, why is it that the two have to be mutually exclusive? Why is it that creative industries are tethered to these overpriced and overpopulated areas? Why can't all cities sustain a creative economy? What is their benefit for even being there in this day and age? And ultimately, how do we even define a city today? It was trying to answer those questions that led me down a new path in life, where after a few unexpected turns, I find myself here now, trying to explain it all to you. I say that it was unexpected because it was never my intention to build an end result that would be worth sharing. In fact, this whole thing started by just simply asking people how they felt about their city or about their community, if they were able to tell who was a part of it or where it even started. Most of the answers that I received from people usually referred to a community that shares some type of resource or history, or it was defined by a jurisdiction and a boundary. They're usually designated by a government, usually visible on an ID. It's about a population that shares the same laws and infrastructure. It's a mutual benefit between its residents. As logical as all of these responses were, I couldn't help but feel that they were just wrong. But I couldn't find a flaw in their logic or offer a better answer myself. That's where I took my first turn and decided to answer my own question. What makes my city? It didn't take long for me to see where my skepticism was coming from. In fact, right away, I began to feel as if my own city didn't even know how to explain itself. Because see, even if you're from this area, this simplified illustration might be hard to understand. And that's because people are used to a representation that looks more like this, because of the narrative that's so synonymous with this area. This is the place where 3 states and 2 countries meet. I've even heard people take it as far as saying this is where 3 cities and 2 nations come together as one when they're talking about El Paso, Juarez, and Las Cruces. But the truth is, this is just a fallacy. In all actuality, there are more than 20 jurisdictions in this one small area, and oftentimes there is no unity amongst them. It's because of that misconception, paired with our history and my experiences as a native, that I began to feel that none of these responses that I had received from people could even begin to apply to this area. Let me explain. See, we know that El Paso's namesake is actually just a truncated version of its original name, El Paso del Norte, the passage of the north, to the north. And we have evidence to prove that people have been in this region for over 10,000 years. Why we only qualify history that has some type of European influence is another talk altogether. But even if we fast forward to the 15th century and the trip made by Columbus, we know that he landed in Central and South America. In 1507, we have the Americas recognized as their own continent for the first time in history. It takes about 90 years for those explorers from Spain to make their way north and find themselves here, where they're greeted by locals and they celebrate with a feast and a mass. Now, this is decades before Pilgrims and Plymouth Rock. It takes about another 60 years for settlers to come into the area when they build the foundation of El Paso del Norte with the Mission de Guadalupe. Just a couple years later, natives fleeing from the conquest in the north make their way here where they're given land and everybody lives peacefully for another 100 years. This is all before the United States is even a country. Just about 20 years after the United States becoming a country, more natives fleeing from the north end up here and build Socorro. All of this is considered some kind of New Mexico territory because the Texas Revolution isn't for another 40 years. And in fact, the Texas Revolution was never even felt in this area. It isn't until around 1850 that the land just becomes Texas. And it's around the same time that they're building a military base on land that is actually considered the opposite of El Paso. Ironically, just about 20 years later, the city of El Paso is incorporated on the same side of the military base. And it takes another 15 years before El Paso South essentially changes their name to Juarez. I've used this river diagram merely as an example. The truth is, like all natural flowing rivers, they change course over time. The river that existed here in the 15th century isn't the same river that we know today. In fact, this path wasn't even agreed upon until 1963. And that's partially why our birthplace is now tethered to a foreign country. But it's the man-made, invisible boundaries that are still having an impact on our daily lives. You see, I was born and raised right about here in the lower valley, and growing up in the 80s and 90s, pre-internet, my world was really small. The furthest west I ever made it on a regular basis was to my grandparents' house in Central. It wasn't until later on in high school that you might have been able to find me on the other side of the border because of a younger drinking age. Just don't tell my parents. But it was around the same time that I made it to the west side on a regular basis. And the first time that I did, it felt like a completely different city. Just the roads, the people, the buildings. That 15 miles made me feel like a foreigner. But it was still the same city. Ironically, somebody who lives just a mile away from a West El Paso resident could be in the same zip code, but they're in a different city. And if that person were to cross the street north, they'd be in the same city, but in a different state. And that line matters because if you're on one side of it, you're going to pay a state income tax, and on the other side, you're not, which leads to a different infrastructure, representatives, emergency services. And this whole area is riddled with these dichotomies. Let's see, if you're in this area, you're in one of the safest cities in the country. But if you're anywhere in this area, you're in what some people consider one of the most dangerous in all of the world. However, if you're anywhere in this section, you're in gun-toting Texas, where you can openly carry a gun on your person without the need to even conceal it. But if you cross this line, that's a federal offense. And if you live in this part of town, your kids can attend the same school as somebody who lives here because they're served by the same school district, but they don't have access to the same public libraries. In fact, there are some places in this county that still don't have access to clean drinking water. And this field of view still doesn't even include Las Cruces. It's because of all of that that I realized there is no way to adequately explain what my hometown is. But I thought maybe there's a way that I could explain what my hometown could be. And that was actually just a lot easier. I did it visually, and I changed some of my methods. By looking at Las Cruces and all of the other municipalities in the area, I felt like I was looking at puzzle pieces. And it didn't take long for me to arrange them in a way that kind of resembled the city of Los Angeles. In fact, there was only about a 20 square mile difference. Once I realized that, I decided to compare this imagined city to every other city. And when I compared them based on area and geographic size, it turns out that we could make the top 10 list. We would be right ahead of Phoenix and behind Houston. When I did the math to calculate population, we'd actually edge out Houston and claim the number 4 spot. That's when I realized that it's all of the fragments that give us the illusion of being insignificant. I thought if only there's a way to rearrange all of these puzzle pieces in real life. But the truth is, we don't need to. All we need to do is just erase the imaginary boundaries. And that's where I found my answer. See, because going through that process helped me realize the only way we can properly define a city is by its people. It's the individuals who interact and understand their surroundings and their environment on a daily basis. It's the collective consciousness of the people that make a city what it is. And it was through my research that I realized a small paradigm shift in this area could potentially lead to 2.5 million people understanding their interdependence and potential in unity. I just needed to find a way to reach them. And that was actually a lot easier to figure out, because people are more connected than ever before, because it's just gotten easier than ever before. You see, in the past, crossing the street in this area could have potentially meant that your home phone number was tied to a different area code, or possibly even a different country code. Or your zip code might have been designated by a different state, or probably came attached with international shipping fees. But now, the internet is pretty much the same everywhere. And there are no limits or extra fees for crossing borders. But this is still just a really simplified understanding, because the real magical part about the internet is the fact that it's able to offer a transmedia experience. You see, no matter what the area code was that you put on your phone, it still just connected you to another phone. And regardless of the zip code that was on mail, it still just was mail at the end of the day. In fact, everything we've ever known, from changing the TV channels on our TV or turning the dial on our radio, have only been able to give us single media streams. But a computer connected to the internet is able to change medias and offer us just completely new experiences. And this is still even an antiquated understanding of the internet, because now the internet is a living, breathing thing. It's turning on our lights and thermostat in our homes. It's driving our cars, and it's making Pokemon characters appear all around us. It's forever changed the global economy, politics, education, and just the human experience. And it's because of my understanding of the internet that I decided to build a proprietary indexing method that can help people understand and navigate this area in a more democratized kind of way that becomes more approachable and offering more context to their experience. But it's not just the geography that's changing. I had to decide which elements help establish a sense of place. Like all of the small businesses that you won't be able to find in other cities, schools, parks, even the public art that helps harvest a community's identity. This is a more centralized and efficient way to amalgamate public resources from multiple jurisdictions. It's that ability to transcend a normal boundary that prevents the public sector from being able to do it themselves. And it's that manipulation of traditional data that prevents people like Google and everybody else to be able to do the exact same thing. This has the potential to engage an entire community, not just the young and tech-savvy, which is why it was so important to build in interfaces that were intuitive and made people just understand without even having to overcomplicate things. And because this is meant to coincide with the human experience, there are no algorithms, there are no user-modified behaviors, which have already splintered us so much on social media. And even though a lot of these technologies are commonplace or can even be considered regressive in 2017, part of the progress was in my ability to do it all by myself. And that's where I took my last turn. See, because even though I was a creative professional before all of this, technology was not my strong suit. But because I went through this entire process by myself, I was able to learn what I needed as I needed it, thanks to the educational opportunities available on the internet. That's how I was able to design all of the data structures, produce all of the content, code all of the interactions, without a team or investors, without taxpayer resources or special interests. And that's the power of going beyond the status quo that exists today for all private businesses. It's that ability to transcend the status quo that makes them so powerful. Because see, now, not only are people just more connected than ever before, but now they're more capable than ever before. And that's why starting a business, even a micro business, has the potential to completely change and disrupt entire industries. But it also has the opportunity to better serve a region and a market that has never been properly served. It's because of that that I know that this area will adopt this system when it rolls out in the next couple months. Because it was entirely conceptualized and designed specifically to answer their problem from their perspective. It's not a quickly scalable system that's going to disrupt economies around the world. And it's not financially benefiting any major overreaching conglomerate that's based outside of the area where it serves. It was entirely understood by its locals. It's what happens when you mix empathy and intention with design and storytelling. And it's that level of human-centered design that needs to be understood and incorporated by all businesses of all sizes, by all nonprofit organizations, by all governments. Because there has never been a perfect one-size-fits-all. And tech and media are no different. It's time that we start focusing on regional technologies and regional solutions to better serve the communities and the people who use the product. It's how I feel that we can even begin to create economic opportunities and creative opportunities around the world, and not just tethered to these certain subsects that have always gotten in. Because we need to start being in the communities that are using them and understanding their perspective. And I think this is just the beginning. Because with all of the advancements being made right now by blockchain technologies and decentralized autonomous organizations, we're approaching an era where societies are going to be completely reimagined and interconnected from the ground up, where an individual will be able to store all of their medical records and employment history, education history, receive their paychecks, pay taxes, sign government documents, and even vote, all from a single device. And we shouldn't waste time trying to speculate what will happen to political parties or politics in general should voting become more inclusive. But we should question, even if just for a second, the importance in choosing a single interpreter when the unequivocal will of the people is understood in real time. Because it's that threat to the status quo that is going to delay the future, especially in these overpopulated megacenters where maintaining the norm is so imperative. But in a place that has been marginalized, disenfranchised, and incapable of proper growth since inception, I feel the future will be a welcomed alternative. That's why I feel the same way this area was vital to the New World in bringing them north, we can now become the passage to the future. Thank you.